Welcome to another edition of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 37 years. I'm trying a new background today. I'm in the same room, but I just turned my computer a bit so that you can see a different wall for a change. It's not very sunny today, so the lighting's a little weird. Yeah, I wanted to share a video with you today. Several of you may have already seen this. It came out just a few days ago. Dr. Boster, who is the founder of the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis in Columbus, Ohio. He publishes many videos that are all very excellent, but this one in particular, I thought I wanted to make a video where I react more or less to the subject. And this particular topic had to do with 10 red flags that should tell you that you should dump your current neurologist and go find another one. What I'd like to do is just step through the 10 red flags that he points out and just give you my own experiences. I'd also be interested to know if your experiences have been similar to mine or different. The first red flag that he talks about is having your visits with your neurologist only once a year. And he believes that even if we're stable, we should be seeing our neurologist more frequently than that. In my experience, even when I was in relapsing remitting MS, I didn't see my neurologist maybe but twice a year. Or if I was having a flare-up or a symptom that was not expected, then I might see them more frequently. But certainly, because my MS has always been relatively stable, at least as far as visible symptoms, I have not really been pressured to see the neurologist more than once a year. And I take Dr. B's point on this. I think that, yeah, the neurologist needs to watch you incrementally over time, right? Because there could be small things. And we all know with MS, some days you have more energy, some days your thinking is clearer, some days you walk better. So the more often they see you, the better. Obviously, they're not going to move in and live with you, but if they only see you once a year, they're only going to really be privy to the bigger changes. And maybe by then, damage has been done. Well, Dr. B, as he says, is very much in favor of having an MRI done on your brain once a year. And I'm thinking, okay, well, there's one where there's definitely been red flags. In all of my years of having MS, I've had quite a few MRIs, right? Over 37 years, you would. But most of them clustered in those early years when my MS was relatively new, when it was clearly in what they would call relapsing remitting. But, once I hit secondary progressive, there was this kind of feeling that, well, you're not really going to have major relapses or anything big happening. So if you're stable, if you feel like you're stable, there's no real need to have another MRI. I have to take some of the blame for that because there have been some problems with my insurance over time that have caused me to not want to take expensive tests or anything that, I would have to pay out of pocket a lot of money. And that would include having an annual MRI. With the result that I think that the last MRI I had done was a good 6 years ago. And shame, right? But I don't know if I can blame the neurologist for that because they can't make you take a test if you don't want one. But yeah, I think I would encourage you to do that because the more I learn about MS and the smoldering MS that I've talked about in other videos, that because we have activity going on even when we don't know it, when we don't have actual symptoms, and we feel like we're stable, we still need to get it checked. Above all, when you're in progressive MS, you may not be having new attacks as such, but your brain volume continues to shrink at a greater rate than it does for those who do not have MS, because normal aging involves some brain shrinkage, but with multiple sclerosis, we have that problem a lot more rapidly. Not sharing MRI images. Well, I've been thinking over my 37 years and all of the MRIs that I have had. And of all of those, I can think of only one case where the neurologist actually sat me down at the computer, pulled up the images, went through them, pointed out the damage, explained to me what was going on there. And that was the last one that I had just had. That was very worthwhile. I have had other physicians that have said to me, if you want copies of your images, go to the records department and they'll give you some and whatnot, and you take them home and you pull them up on your computer. And I've had cases where the discs didn't work right anyway, or was incompatible software or whatever. But even when I was able to see them, there was one that was on films. That's how old we're talking here. It was on films. And I'm looking at it going, okay, I now know that I actually have a brain, because there it is. I can see it. And there were things, but I don't know. I mean, how could I tell what I was even looking at? So I would agree that this is an area where we as patients need to ask the doctor to not only share the images with us, to actually explain. And especially if we've had different MRIs over the years, explain the changes, highlight what's important, highlight what consequences there might be because we have a lesion in a certain place. Well, as far as the subject of having labs done, I can't really say. I don't know of too many times when my neurologist has specifically requested lab work. They have always been interested in copies of lab work that my primary care doctors or others have authorized, but they don't normally ask for special ones, and that might be because, as Dr. Boster mentions in the video, if you're on Copaxone, you don't need labs because there's no effects that they are concerned about from that. And that was the medicine that I was taking. So that could be the reason why there wasn't any. I'm now on amantadine, and my neurologist indeed has sent me for blood work just to be sure, because I only have one kidney after my cancer surgery, and the clearance rate of one kidney obviously is not as good as two. And the concern was that we don't want too much building up in your system. So that there was some dose adjustment and whatnot. And most of my MS life, I haven't even been on a medication. So I'm not really sure what the lab works would show. I did ask one time about vitamin D levels, and that was my primary care doctor, but he said, well, you can specifically ask for that, but it's expensive, and the insurance company may not cover it, so I didn't do it. But I would think that would have been a useful one to have. As far as invisible symptoms, Dr. Boster talks about a lot of different invisible symptoms of MS. They really affect your quality of life, even though they don't show up on an MRI or any other kind of test that the neurologist might do while you're in the office. Dr. Boster is adamant that neurologists should be regularly asking you questions about your mood, your level of fatigue, your level of energy, your thinking, your memory, bladder and bowel function, sexual function. Have you had any falls? Have you had any infections recently? Those are all very important, and I have been thinking about over time in all my visits to the neurologist, how many times have they actually asked me those questions? And other than falls, and almost every time I've had a doctor ask me, have you fallen in the last 6 months? Other than that, no. And there have been times when I have actually asked the doctor. I remember one time that I specifically asked him a question about constipation, and he looked puzzled as as if to say, why would you be asking your neurologist about constipation? Isn't that some other specialty area? No, why would I know? And I told him that even I had read the literature and I had seen that constipation was a fairly common side effect of having MS. He was actually quite surprised about that and made a note. So, yeah, sometimes you feel like you're educating your doctors too. He meant well and all, but I think that we have to, as patients, come armed with questions about specific things we've noticed. If our mood seems to be off, or if we are having trouble bringing words to mind, we need to bring that up, because chances are good that your neurologist is not going to be asking that. Well, this particular one, I don't know that I've been asked that. The years that I was on Copaxone would probably be the time when that might have been happening. I've had several neurologists over the time that I was on Copaxone, because I was on for about 10 years. I'm trying to remember if they asked me if I was adhering to the medicine. And I don't really remember that they did. I can't swear that they did or didn't, but I don't remember them specifically asking me about that. I do think that that ought to be part of a conversation. It just makes sense to me. I mean, how can they tell whether the medicine is effective unless they know that you're actually taking it like you're supposed to be taking it? Or maybe you had a reason for why you weren't taking it on the schedule that they wanted you to. You need to discuss that with them. And sometimes we just don't think of all that stuff before we go. We get there, we kind of, I don't know about you, but if I don't have a list, my brain just kind of freezes and I forget what I wanted to say. So it only goes to show you that we have to be our own advocates, and we have to be the ones who think of the questions to ask and the points to raise. Now, as far as not watching you walk, I would have to say that this is the one area of the 10 that Dr. Boster is going to talk about where I have never run into a neurologist who did not want to watch me walk. Now, where I will say things could maybe be better is that I never really understood what they were getting out of that. I've thought that it had to do with how they were calculating your EDSS score, your disability score, and that always seemed to me to be kind of a limiting thing anyway. I mean, just because I walk well or not well, does that mean I'm more or less disabled in the larger sense of disabled? You know, there's more to disability than whether you can walk. So I thought that's what it had to do with, but I liked what Dr. Boster said, because he talked about how they not only time you to see how quickly you can do it, but they're looking at the mechanics of how you walk. And that, I had no idea that they were really looking at that, like your arm swing, and I had no idea. So that may be a question for doctors when you go and you have them do the walking test, or when they ask you to do the walking test, go ahead and do the walking test. But if you can get them to tell you, were you able to learn anything from what you just observed? I know a lot of times doctors don't want to say much at the time. They want time to reflect on it and look at it and think about it and whatnot. But you're the patient, you know. I mean, we're all patients. We are paying for the time. We might as well get something out of it, right? Well, I had to laugh at this one. If the doctor offers you a first-line medication, then turn on your heel and go, right? Well, this is where having MS for as long as I've had it really comes into play, because when I went into the doctor's office and we talked about treatment options, he did exactly what Dr. Boster said. He handed me literature on the 3 different prevailing therapies, Avonex, Betaseron, and Copaxone, and he sent me home with them, and he said, watch these videos and read the literature, and then come back and tell me which one of these you want to start on. So I just got to pick. And as Dr. Boster says, that's crazy. Nobody picks their own medicine. The doctor has to match it up. What's the right medicine for that patient? Well, to be fair, that was so near the beginning of being able to treat MS at all that I won't fault the doctor really for that. They didn't have any of the safety and efficacy data on those drugs that they do now. And they didn't really even understand entirely how they work. They had theories about how they worked, but they didn't really know. So I don't know. I don't know how he could have done better than he did. But now, I guess I was surprised to hear that that would still be going on, that you would still walk into a neurologist's office and that they would give you a choice of medications. Now, there's not any harm in suggesting to a doctor, saying, hey, I've been reading about such and such, and I've been wondering, is that something that would be good for me? I've done that myself. But I think as far as the doctor just letting the patient totally decide what medicine is best, not a good idea. And like I say, I'm surprised that's still going on. Dr. Boster's final red flag is whether the doctor is taking any time to learn about you. And this kind of relates to a couple of things, right? It relates to how frequently they see you. How are they going to really get to know you if they only see you once a year? I'd be surprised if they remembered you at all without going through their case notes a little bit. But the other problem, I think, has to do with how medicine is almost like an assembly line in some places where the doctor is given only a limited amount of time to talk with the patient. And depending on what other problems are going on, there may not be much time for the kinds of conversations that Dr. Boster is saying are necessary for the doctor to get to know about you and your goals and your likes and dislikes and your life situation and whatnot. I know it would be ideal and it would be wonderful, but I have had a number of neurologists that it was very clear to me from the number of people in the waiting room. They were on a schedule, and especially the ones that work for a larger clinic or hospital or some other group, as opposed to being in private practice where they have a little bit more discretion over their schedule. And yet even those people, I would have to say, probably are under some pressure too, because most folks who are in private practice have expenses that are borne by the hospital or the clinic or whatever if they were to work for somebody else. So they are under the gun to see as many patients as possible in that amount of time. And none of that really is conducive to forming any kind of a picture of the complete person. So I think it's kind of an ideal to be shooting for. And I applaud Dr. Boster because I'm going to assume that he walks the talk. If he says that he thinks it's important, he's doing it for his own patients. So, in summary, I think that's an excellent set of red flags. And I think that it's not necessarily something that would make you turn on your heel and leave your current neurologist. But if you feel like you aren't getting what you need from your neurologist, you need to say so. And I guess from there you would decide whether you would want to stay with your neurologist. What kind of reception do you get when you say to the neurologist, can we take some time so you can explain to me what my MRI is actually saying? Or can you tell me what you learned by watching me walk? Or do you think that this certain medication might be something that I would benefit from? Or do you think that I could benefit from this clinical trial that I found? Come to your appointments with a list of questions and concerns or things that have happened, things that you have noticed, things that you're just not even sure of. It's your time, even if it's curtailed because of their schedule or whatever. It is still your time, so make the most of it. And as far as Dr. Boster is concerned, he might be the closest reason I've ever come to thinking that maybe I might want to live in Ohio. I'm kind of happy here in the Pacific Northwest, but I'll tell you what, it would sure be nice to have a neurologist like Dr. Aaron Boster. I encourage you to look him up on YouTube and subscribe to his channel. He has so much good information. He's taught me an awful lot about multiple sclerosis and where the state of the art is these days. And that's very important for us to know. Well, that's all I have for you today. Take care, and I will see you in my next video.